Welcome to episode 5 of the Java with AI series. In this episode, we're going to build a whole full-fledged app 10 times faster with the help of AI. This project is going to be large. It's not just a snippet of code, it's going to be a full-fledged game that we can actually play. So we can create a new folder somewhere memorable called Java Final Project or something similar. And then we can open it, shift right click, and then click open with code. And now you can see we've successfully opened this folder. So you can see it's currently in restricted mode, but we can trust this folder so that we can now fully make use of this folder to actually get started coding. So firstly, we want to actually generate the OOP framework for the characters in our game. So firstly, we want to create a base game character class with fields for name and health, and then a take damage method to actually reduce the character's health. So this will enable the player and monsters that we fight in our game to take damage. So we also want a subclass player with fields for experience, which is gained throughout gameplay, and its inventory, which contains all of the loot that the player collects. And then finally, we have another subclass called monster with a field called loot dropped, which determines what it drops when killed. And so we also want to create a constructor, and we want to make sure it takes in a name, an initial health value, and initializes all the fields properly. And so when we send this, you can see it generates all of the classes for us. So now we can just create a new file here, maybe titled main.java, because this is our main Java file. And so then what we can do is actually put this main method that was in the game character file, that was in the game character class, inside the main method, or the main class here. And then you can see that we have some errors here. So it's saying the public type game character must be defined in its own file. So we can just get rid of the public there. And then we have to change these private fields to protected so that other subclasses can actually see all the information. And now if we run the code, you can see that we actually have some player and monster objects printed out. And they have take damage methods, and additionally, it also created other methods for us, the Windsurf AI, such as add experience and add item to inventory. So you can see how it already prepared a lot of the mechanics inside of our game automatically for us, which will speed up the development process of the rest of the game, the actual game loop, considerably. But we will have to make some changes here. Firstly, in the player class, we want the XP in the inventory to be initialized to default values. So the experience should start at 0. And then the inventory should start as just an empty array list. And then for the monster, we actually want to provide the loot that the monster should drop, instead of having it set to null. So that way, we can actually give it loot to drop each monster as soon as we initialize each monster object. And so now we have to fix our constructors here. And we can say the goblin drops gold, for example. So the way we want the game to start is we want the player to provide their name to pass into this newly created player object. So we could add a comment here. And then it'll create a print statement saying enter your name. And we actually need a scanner for that. So we can create a new scanner like this. And then import the scanner. And then we can get the player name. And then we can create the player object from it. And it can have a health value of 100. And then what we want to do is actually create the game loop for the game. So this can be a while true loop. We'll manually break out of the loop when something happens. So additionally, for extra formatting, we can just print out a new blank line just for extra spacing. And then now in the game loop, for each iteration of the game loop, we want to ask the user what they want to do. And so now it generates, Windsurf automatically generates some options here. So one, we can fight a monster, check our stats, or just quit the game. And so now we actually have to get the user's choice. And so now it creates some code to get it as an integer. And then what we can do is actually encase this. We can actually ask Windsurf chat, because this code right here, just getting the next integer, could actually produce an error if the user's input isn't in the correct format. So what we can do is actually ask Windsurf in the chat here, how do I get the user's choice without any errors or crashes? And so we can also focus on the main method here. And so now you can see it generates some code to get the user's choice without errors or crashes. So we can copy that here, and we can actually put it in here. So now if we run the code, we can enter our name, and if we say give invalid input, then you can see it enters an infinite loop. So we can actually ask that to the AI here. If I enter invalid input, that is not an integer, it enters an infinite loop. Why is that? And so now it's saying we can modify the code to handle non-integer input by using a while loop instead of an if statement. So what we can do is actually copy this code here and there's actually more code down at the bottom. And so now if we were to run it, if we enter invalid input, then it'll only escape once we actually type in a number. So now the issue is actually fixed and we can actually move on to the fighting a monster and checking stats logic. So now let's start with the logic for fighting a monster. So firstly, we want to come up with a random name for the monster. Like it could be either goblin or zombie or some other monster name. So we can ask Windsurf here, how do I come up with a random name for a monster? For example, goblin or zombie or something else. So it's saying here we can use the random class to generate a random number and then use that number to select a name from a predefined list. So we can import these extra classes here. And then it says we can create a list of monster names. So we can just put that here because we're going to be generating the monster names inside the main method and then passing them in. So we can say that instead. And then now it tells us I have to scroll to the correct place, but now you can see that it generates some code to create the list of monster names here. So this is saying that there's an illegal modifier here for the parameter monster names, and only final is permitted. So we can get rid of everything but final. And so now we can just add to the monster names here. And so now it even gives us code to generate a random index for the monster name. And then we want to generate some random loot for the monster to drop. So I could say, how do I generate random loot as well? And so again, it's creating it in the monster class. So it's saying I want to generate the random loop in the main method in the game loop. So this solution here is still not ideal. It's still modifying the monster class. So what we can actually do here is create another list for the monster loot. And so what we can do is add gold, silver, and copper to start off with for the monster loot. And so then we can generate some random monster loot. So we can generate a new random index and then pass the random loot into the monster object. And so now let's print out a message saying this monster and then print out its name. And then we can say this name of the monster appeared. So it generates a message right here saying we encountered and then this monster's name. So we also want to add specific options for what the user can do. And so here you can see it's generated options, 1 attack or 2 run away. So those are the possible choices we're going to be coding in. And so it's even taking the error correction code from this previous choice right here and adapted it for the monster choice as well. So now we can handle the choice for fighting the monster. And then what we want to do is if we attack the monster, then we can deal some damage to it. So we can deal a random amount of damage from 1 to about 10. And then it'll say we attack the monster for this much damage. And then we should probably also deal damage back to the player. So that there's some reward, but there's also some risk for attacking the monster. And so now, case 2, that's running away from the monster, so it just prints a run away message. And then it also checks for invalid input there as well. And then what we should probably do so let's take a look at the code here. So we should probably create a loop here to constantly get a decision from the user. So we want to keep doing this while the monster is still alive and the player is still alive. So now we can move all this code for getting the user's choice into here. And now we want to check if either the monster has died or the player has died. So in that case, we can exit the loop. And so for each monster kill, we get 10 XP, EXP, and then we get loot in our inventory. And then we can actually print out the experience and items in the inventory later when we print out the user stats. And so now what we want to do is actually check if the player has been defeated next. So now what we want to do is break out of the loop. And so we should probably also change this game loop to check if the player is still alive. Instead. So that way, when the player dies, the game ends. So now we can actually test the gameplay here. So if we were to run the Java code, we can enter our name, and then we can fight a monster, and then we want to attack, let's say. So we attack the zombie for 6 damage. Then we can keep attacking. And then eventually, you can see we defeated the zombie. And so now, if we go to check our stats, you can see it's not working. So let's work on actually checking the stats. So our gameplay for fighting the monster actually works properly. It's just that we still have to finish the game with this part of the gameplay experience. So now we have that thanks to this auto completion here. So now if we check our stats, you can see it tells us our name, health, experience, and inventory. So now we can fight a monster until it's dead, or we can run away if we want to. And then after we defeat the goblin, you can see we gain 10 experience and get copper, but we lose health. So the gameplay is actually functioning correctly, meaning we now have a fully functional RPG game that we created using the help of Windsurf to build it 10 times faster compared to if we built it manually. So if we were to test it with bad input, then you can see it doesn't actually crash, and the gameplay also works perfectly out of the box, and we've generated the OOP framework for the game as well, all with the help of AI. So we've actually created a fully functional project all using AI, which is amazing in its own right. But if you want to extend it further in your own time, you could fix various logic errors. Like, for example, you might have noticed during our testing, negative health values for the monster was being printed out when the monster was defeated. So you could fix various issues in the code. Or you can use Windsurf to add a completely new feature, like a shop or a new character in the game that you can interact with. And finally, the player doesn't really have a way to heal, so eventually the player dies, which means the game can't keep going forever. So you can add a healing feature as well, so that the player can keep playing the game forever. They don't have to die eventually. So congratulations, we're all done with the Java with AI series. Make sure to look out for the next coding series, which will be coming out soon. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.